Hello there, and welcome to our series on working across cultures for the international executive and senior manager who indeed has to work with business partners around the world. This program is designed to help you understand more deeply the nature and the culture of your counterparts in the United States of America. So we're going to open this program with a bit of an introduction into the way America is viewed. As an industrialized country, the United States has adopted what could be called a rather scientific approach to business compared to other countries. In some ways, it seems that every aspect of commercial life is studied and analyzed, and this kind of approach is both respected and acted upon in the US. A lot of resources available in America for the study on the methodology of business than in any other country. And a lot of new management theory and doctrines have their origins in the States. So this is an example of basically how Americans view things. Things are, in some ways, quantified and assessed, evaluated and looked at rather deeply. Things have to have a methodology. And in some ways, this is how Americans conduct their business. Very particular and in some ways a very scientific approach to business. In the States, everything has to be quantified and assessed. If you've traveled there, indeed you will have experienced this. All things in business particularly, even down to such issues as human resources and training, are analysed in rather a thorough manner. And the analyses of those things carry a lot of weight with decision makers. This is a scientific approach to manpower, a scientific approach to the human aspect of business. And certainly there are many assessments also that are done on employees in United States companies to map their personal development. So this in itself gives you an idea as to how businesses in America, and indeed American businessmen, view the way things should be done. This in itself is a good thing because the scientific approach that Americans take is more or less a constant search for the better, more effective methods to use. There are always new ways of looking at things, new things to be looked for, new things to be researched, new things to be found, and quantified and measured. And this approach to the way that business is done, or the way the industry has developed in America, has led to a business environment that is represented by the fact that the presence of change is a constant factor. Things are never always the same. There's always things that can be researched. There's always new things coming up, new inventions, new innovations. So change is part of the way of doing business, or the viewpoint of how business is done in the United States. The most common response to a changing environment is realignment of the organization, and this in turn has produced a workforce which is in a state of constant flux. In the United States, people have jobs, they leave jobs, they're fired, they move on. They apply for new jobs, they do jobs, they resign from jobs, they move on. It seems that there is a lot of movement in business in America. People leave an organization, are fired or made redundant, and then appear in another organization. So there is a great sense of employee mobility. But this should not be seen as having a lack of loyalty to employers for whom people work. That is not the case. Indeed, Americans in the workforce do have great loyalty, but there is always this concept, this view, this state of change that's happening and mobility in the business environment. whilst people do work for companies, American companies, they put everything into the job and are totally committed. But we do see that there is quite a fluidity in the business environment. So Americans are dedicated. You will see their basic psyche is to be dedicated to what they are doing. And things need to be fairly thorough. Things are a little bit scientific in some ways to the way they do things. American business structures. These are quite varied and have quite a few different characteristics in common. A company is an entity in its own right, and it exists independently from its employees. First up, there's that kind of structure. And members of that company come and go. They perform their roles in the normal life cycle of the company and then leave when they're no longer required by that organization. The relationship between employer and employee is merely a transactional one. And this means that the relationship and sentiment are a luxury which cannot be justified, really. Most of the relationships within the American system of these companies is very much a transactional one. Everybody has a contract and you adhere strictly to the contract. When the contract is finished, then it's over. You move on. So we also have an organization which has, of course, a CEO at the top. And in organizations such as this, the CEO holds great sway within the company. The CEO is the ultimate power. Senior management is more embedded in the personality at the top than in some other countries. The CEO has to look good. The CEO has to be inspirational. The CEO has to have certain charisma in most of these companies. And the CEO is the ultimate visible character who is the representative of that company, not only in America, but worldwide. In Germany, for instance, senior management is more collegiate in its approach, and the role of the CEO is played down less than in America. Although a company will have a board of directors in America, the board is highly unlikely to have much input in the day-to-day running of the company. That is very much left up to the hands of the CEO, who stands or falls on the results. The CEO is the ultimate guy. His head will be chopped if certain things don't happen, if the share prices don't go up, if the downturn is not turned around in that company. So the CEO has an ultimate position and is a very major focal point in an organization in the US. And thirdly, accountability within the company tends to be very, very visible and easily observable. Americans like to know exactly where they stand and what their responsibilities are and to whom they report. This is very, very important for them to perform their tasks. Everything has to be clearly defined, the procedures and tasks clearly defined, and the role of each person is clearly defined in a contract, mostly. So we can see that it is quite varied. However, it is quite structured as well, and there is more of the scientific approach to the way business is done in the United States. Moving along to the way Americans manage their businesses, let's take a little look at their style of management. We could say that the style is described as individualistic in approach. That means that although things might be discussed in open forum, the ultimate responsibility for consequences of decisions lies with the boss. Support or consensus will disappear when things go wrong, and of course this has great value in the way that Americans run their business. The upside of this accountability is, of course, the American dream that outstanding success will inevitably bring outstanding rewards. So how well you do will bring rewards. That's the name of the game. If you do well as an individual, you will be rewarded. That's how it is. So therefore, American managers are more likely to disregard the opinions of subordinates than managers in other countries, perhaps, such as in Australia, for example, where more consensus and more compromise-oriented cultures do things differently. This can obviously lead to certain problems and difficulties between cultures, and this can sometimes seem to boil over in meeting situations. So the individualistic approach in management style is very much headed to the boss being the focal point, the boss being the one who is more the decision maker and who runs the show. There are many job descriptions that sometimes all tend to seem the same, and they may definitely describe the positions of certain individuals, but titles in any case tend to be a poor reflection on the relative importance of an individual within a company. So even though there are many titles and many positions, they really do not reflect the importance of the individual themselves within that company. Importance is linked to power, and this could be determined by a number of factors such as headcount responsibility, profitability of sector or strategic importance to the organisation at that point in time. So the American style of management certainly does show that even though there are lots of titles, they can be very confusing indeed. And the individual is the much more important thing. That individual who will be working hard towards achieving results for the ultimate gain of reaching rewards and reaching their goals. This is a very driving kind of style where individual value and individual achievement is certainly rewarded. If we move on to the way meetings are conducted, if you want to describe a meeting that takes place in America, a word which Americans often use is aggressive and confrontational. They will admit that themselves. It could be that you've had experience in the past with meetings and your American counterparts. Usually open debate, directly debating of relevant issues, even at the expense of personal relationships, is considered important. Very much they want to get to the point of things. Very much they want to discover the truth about things. And it doesn't matter how they do that. They are a very directional, they have a very directional approach to meetings and to management. This can be very alien. It can be very strange to cultures who always put diplomacy and harmony at the heart of the way they conduct business meetings. So you could come away rather shocked at having to sit through a rather abrasive and very direct discussion when people may be feeling rather badly during that discussion as well. Some cultures do unfortunately see this as people showing personal animosity to others. But sometimes that is not the case. This is just the way people do business. This is how Americans feel very comfortable conducting their business. And indeed, if you have been to New York City and have had meetings with people of New York State, then you will know that they can come across very aggressive and sometimes appear very rude. But that is not how they wish to intend to be, or they don't wish to offend you. They're merely just getting on with the business of the day. This approach to business is seen as a positive step by Americans in addressing whatever the vital issues and pressing issues might be. And of course, they are time pressured. Time is important. and they are ambitious. And American business executives don't really have the time to be vague. They see that it's more important to use time to be effective and direct and straight to the point. If you find that you generalize and you go on and on and on and around and about, they will not see that in a very good light. They will say to you, let's get down to the point. What is the point you're trying to make? Diplomacy and lack of focus, they equate with being weak and not able to actually confront issues and speak your mind. So be careful here. If you are dealing with Americans in a meeting, they expect you to be also very vocal about what you want to say. If you tend to be rather reserved and use the more diplomatic approach, you might have to sort of adapt and come halfway, which they may have to as well, in order to get the meeting on the way. Sometimes the meetings include formal presentations by more than one of the participants, and these presentations are a vital element of the business of meetings and demonstrate professional competence. Presentations should be very well researched. If you are going to present in an American meeting, you need to really present very, very well and deliver it very positively. And nothing should be missed. You should also be very enthusiastic and committed to that presentation. You have an opportunity to impress, and this is what a meeting is all about to our American or your American counterparts. It's important if you want to be successful, it's important if you want achievement, to present well and look good and do all the right things and show that you are professional in every respect. So this is what is expected in a meetings with American counterparts. There is no time to waste, there's no time to dilly-dally or be vague. The purpose of the meeting is to achieve something. And very much it will be in a very assertive, aggressive way that this is done in the meeting. Perhaps in the future you might become part of a team or have to deal with teams in the US. And in the US, teams are groups of individuals brought together for the moment to complete a task. Perhaps a little bit different to the way that Australians, for example, might view teams. The groups get together, everybody's expected to fully commit to the common goal and really work with a dedication and a purpose to ensure that all of the goals are met. It's important to be a team player, to show enthusiasm for the project and to show belief in the ultimate achievement of the objectives. This is very necessary. You can't just go into a team in the United States and be half-hearted about it, to be half committed. You have to be fully committed and be very, very dedicated to the cause. But when that cause or that objective is met and complete, the team will dissipate quickly. There's no need for it to hang around and stay together. And the team then will move on to the next task with the same approach. This is where we see that there is a state of flux. There seems to be a lot of change. People seem to be able to adapt to that change. It is a part of the psyche and a part of the way things are done in the United States. Mobility is there. Change is there. To break up a team in the environment in America is less traumatic than in any other group-oriented culture where identity is assumed to the group. So it is easier for teams to leave each other in the States, perhaps, than other cultures where a collective spirit and a culture of identity has been formed, where bonds are very, very much more important than actually getting the tasks done. So in the United States, teams are expected to be quite transitory rather than permanent in nature. And the individuals in those teams stay for the purpose of the team and then leave and move on. It seems rather matter of fact, but that seems to be the way that teams work in the United States. Communication styles in business in America are determined by many of the approaches to business that we have already described. Americans have the desire to debate and discuss issues very openly, and direct discussion leads Americans to be seen as quite aggressive, as we have said previously. Sometimes people even think they are rude. Coded speech and verbosity is often seen as time-wasting, so they don't really appreciate diplomatic usage of the language or flowery words and things like that. They prefer to see very direct, straight to the point usage of simple language. Direct and robust, rather strong, powerful debate is the way that their meetings and their communication styles are. So when an impasse is reached in meeting situations, the reaction is often to address it directly and with feeling. Get up and really say what you think, really say what you feel. Unfortunately, this can be viewed as a signal of a breakdown in meaningful discussions, and other cultures may see that the communication styles are a bit too rough and ready for their liking. However, Americans see this as positive. This is the way they conduct business. This is the way, actually, they approach life. Robust, direct, and right out there. On first introductions, however, the American can seem very friendly, of course, and polite, and courteous about you and asking about you, and this seems to be in a little bit of a contrast with how they may, half an hour later, be confronting you and being very directional in a discussion. Sometimes the friendliness of "have a nice day" or "hi, how are you doing?" Sometimes that is a little bit hard to understand. I think if you approach it as being part of the protocol that goes on, part of the language that is expected as part of the normal daily greetings, etc., then if you approach it that way, you won't be too concerned. When Americans say these things, they're not, of course, wanting you to be their long life friend forever. They are just using it as a courteous protocol to get the proceedings started. And, of course, they have meaning in those words. But it does seem to many other cultures seem to be quite overt, quite over-friendly. Sometimes the real message is a little bit obscured in the meetings, and a lot of dramatic words are used, and the real message is lost. However, having said that, do try to find the point with them. Do try to ask and do try to debate as best you can to find the real message, and ask questions. They will enjoy the fact that you do ask questions. That is, of course, a definite yes. So please pursue and ask. Don't be overwhelmed by the seemingly aggressive approach that they do take in debates and in discussions. Let your voice be heard. Do stand up and make your voice be heard. Join in and show them that you too have the ability to share your views. So you do have to find common ground, but be prepared for the first up reactions you might have when you're having some very directional confrontation and discussions. The way Americans communicate too is also important to know that they are very open in conversation about private affairs more than perhaps in other European countries. And they'll often ask, quite innocently, personal questions at the very early stage of a relationship where you don't really even know them. Sometimes that may be felt as being intrusive. Sometimes you might think that's a little bit too personal, and so maybe you can just say you get back to them later, or you have to respond in a way that will not really offend them. But this is the nature. They are inquiring by nature. Their whole lifestyle is one of continuous learning and development and researching, and a scientific method being that they like to quantify things. And so when they inquire about you, which may seem in a personal way, they are inquiring because that is part of their nature, their natural nature, and it's not meant to represent anything else. Women in America indeed play an active role, and that is a very obvious fact. And you will find that you will be working, if you are dealing with United States partners, most definitely you will be working with women. It is important that in a business, everything is seen to be politically correct on gender issues in the workplace particularly. So in dealing with women in business in America, treat them very equally as you would the male counterpart in all business meetings, in all ways of doing things. Anything else would be perceived as stereotyping and maybe regarded or maybe thought of as being offensive, because there is a lot of political correctness about the behaviour of men and women in business in the United States. Dressing when you visit the States, or when indeed you see your partners here, also the dress code for men is usually a bit of a risky business. It's far more difficult to generalise on this subject because dress will vary from the formal dark business suit to a shirt and tie or a t-shirt and shorts, as you have seen examples of Bill Gates or other people, Steve Jobs, for example, when they're doing conferences and seminars, they dress in jeans and t-shirts and sand shoes. So when doing business in the US, sometimes you need to look a little bit more closely and explore the relationship a little bit more closely to understand it exactly. The further west you are doing business in America, the more likely you will get informal dress in business. But that may not always be the case. So really look at things case by case. As you deal with your partners by partners, look at their habits, their styles, who they are, and that will help you along. The best advice when you're travelling is always to take quite a variety of clothes with you in case you have to meet different situations. So let's look at the tips that we can see when doing business with your American partner. As we said, Americans value straight talking and getting to the point. Without a doubt, that is how they operate. It is not meant to be ill-intentioned in any way. As we've gone through things before, don't think that the way people do things are wrong. It's just how they are. Tip number 2. Respect is earned through real achievement rather than through whether you're senior or whether you are from a good family or whether you have qualifications. Respect is earned through who you are as an individual and your individual achievement. And that achievement has to be conspicuous. It has to be visible. You could have lots of letters after your name showing where you studied, etc., but that will mean nothing. You will not get respect unless you have earned it by yourself, unless you have achieved things as an individual. Tip number 3. Self-depreciation is often misunderstood by Americans as a sign of weakness. They like to see you sell yourself. They sell themselves. They are a self-appreciating, self-promoting culture. They're very proud to talk about who they are and what they want to do, etc. That is the nature of their psyche. So sell your plus points. If you do not, then they see that as a sign of weakness. Tip number 4. Humour is frequently used in business situations, but be careful. It is unlikely to be appreciated when matters become tense. It's a little bit different to the Australians, who use humour in almost every situation. However, in America, be careful when humour is used. Of course, join in, have some fun, but be perceptive as to when the humour should be dropped. Tip number 5, time is money in America, and indeed a lot of other cultures, but more so in America. Wasting people's time through vagueness is a lack of sense of purpose. It is not regarded very, very highly, and it will not produce good results. So you have to be timely. You have to be very, very sure that you're not wasting time. People are adding the dollars up as things progress or don't progress. So that's something you must be very careful of. Tip number 6. Compromise is often sought, but at the brink, when things have come to such a point that things cannot go on any further. When there is real desperation, they will revert to compromise. Tip number 7. Don't be offended by seemingly over personal questions. As I have said, this is in the nature of the individual. They like to ask questions. They don't mean to intrude. It's just how they are. So don't be offended by it. And number 8, the dress code is very variable. So check what the appropriate mode is before you depart. Try to seek and ring and find out. Otherwise, you may dress inappropriately, and that may not be thought of very highly. As we see in tip number 9, structures and everything are designed to bring quick wins rather than long-term wins. Even though long-term objectives are looked at, short-termism, we say, is everywhere. So structure your proposals to emphasize quick things that can be gained in a short period of time, rather than long-term objectives. Americans like to see results. They're very results-oriented, very task-oriented, and therefore structure things so there can be tasks and results in the short term. Tip number 10. Sometimes you may find that American is best is what you see, or the view of how things should be done. So be prepared to say what you feel about that and counter that, because as you may believe, American is not always the best. You may have arguments based on things that say something else is the best. So be prepared to receive this, because it will be brought up, and counter it with very evidenced, very quantitative and thorough details in your counter arguments, because you are dealing with individuals who feel very proud of their nation and all of the things that have happened in their country. So you will need to be careful and be able to counter this in a very good way when you argue that point. Number 11. This is a fact that many Americans never leave America. They are not the world's greatest travellers. So you might find that there are views that are very much the American view of the world rather than a worldly view. People who travel a lot tend to have a more open mind to certain issues, whereas if people don't travel a lot, then their views are more of their own nation, of internal views. So bear this in mind when you are meeting people. And enthusiasm is, of course, endemic in business in America. Enthusiasm to do well, to join in. If you do not exhibit this, then it will be interpreted that you are giving up, that you have a defeatist attitude. The yes, we can win spirit is everywhere in the United States. It was born in the United States, so to speak, and this is evidenced by a lot of the self-help, a lot of the research and training and human resource development that goes on in America. So enthusiasm is there all the way, and it might pay to try to inject that in your discussions when you're having them too. Tip 13, new is good, and change is ever present. So therefore, new ideas, new models are well appreciated. This is something very important. If you wish to succeed, then also be innovative and think new, new, new. Tip 14, gift giving is unusual in American corporations, and in many companies there are policies in place to restrict acceptance of presents. So that's something you do need to think about very, very carefully. It can be seen in a very negative light. It could be seen as a form of bribery, as a matter of fact. So be careful how you do that. Perhaps you may wish to host a meal rather than give gifts. And in tip 15, Americans do tend to work very long hours and take fewer vacation days than people in Europe. So do remember and do consider that when you are over there and you're part of a team, that a lot is expected. Hours can be very, very long. Indeed, lunches, if you're coming from Vietnam, lunch hours are precise. I know in Vietnam the lunch hours do tend to linger, and your sense of time here in Vietnam is perhaps a little bit different. So do consider those things when you are traveling over to the US. We move on to tip 16. Try to be punctual. Time is very, very important, and if you are late, make sure that you apologize. Don't just walk in the door, smile and quietly go to the back of the room. Stand up and say that you are sorry that you're late. It's very, very important in American business. Tip 17. Even though there may not be a very strong hierarchy in American companies, the boss is still the boss, and he is expected to make all the decisions and accountable for those decisions. As we explained earlier, in the way that corporations are structured or companies are structured, this element is definitely there. It's very much the boss is the boss, as opposed to being more collegiate, as in other cultures. Tip 18. Americans often socialize outside the office, of course, and this can include the family. So family is very important in these particular occasions. So if you're planning on doing a bit of socializing, it might pay you to invite perhaps your counterpart's wife along or something like that. Tip 19. Titles, as we say, can be quite confusing, and don't rely on them to guide you to the importance of a person's position in an organization. There are many, many different kinds of titles. So these are really not clear indicators of who does what. The next tip, business is serious in America, and it is important that you are seen to be serious in your intent and commitment. So use a serious approach to getting your business done. You are there to work together to achieve results. Task orientation is high on the agenda of businessmen in the United States, so pay attention to that fact. Finally, we will now look at entertaining with your US counterparts. In America, timing is important, and making the best use of time is very, very essential. So it could be that you might find yourself having a business meeting at breakfast at 7 o'clock. As early as that, yes, that's true. For people who have not had business ventures with American counterparts before, this may come as a bit of a shock, but it is part of the way that Americans conduct business, and it is not seen as ridiculous or inconvenient. It is seen as making the best use of time. So if you're invited to a breakfast meeting, then yes, accept, go ahead. You will get a lot achieved. You will have to wake up earlier, and you will have to be accepting of the fact that that is the way things are done. If you're invited to dinner, this may be also scheduled quite early. And you can also, of course, be invited to lunch, and this is probably the best time for business entertaining. A lot can be achieved over a meal in the United States. People will conduct business, people will have conversation during that meal, and they will be serious about it. Meetings are meant to be serious with Americans. They don't really want to waste time, even if a meeting is over a meal. They don't really have any problem discussing very serious and concrete commercial issues over a meal, as I said. The idea that mealtime is set apart from business and that it is not polite to raise the subject of business over food is quite a strange thing to Americans. They don't mind. They don't mind talking about business anytime. 24/7 is something that has come from the Americans, saying that they are open 24/7 over meals at any time to discuss business. It doesn't mean that you can't have social conversation during these meals or business meetings over meals. Of course you can. But you will find that you will get a lot done also in terms of the commercial aspect. So be sociable and be businesslike. Both of those things will go well together. If you're not familiar with eating patterns of some cultures, it's quite a thing to notice that Americans tend to only use a knife when they cut food items. And after the food has been cut, the knife is put down and only the fork is used. This is how Americans eat, as opposed to, say, Australians. Australians use both a knife and a fork together at the same time, cutting and holding the knife while the food is then eaten and taken from the fork. But this is something that is quite distinctive to the American way of eating, and you may notice it because it is quite different. Some foods may be eaten by hand, of course, with both the knife and the fork laid to rest. And if you are entertaining, in most restaurants, staff rely heavily on tips. They rely on tips to supplement their basic salary, and therefore tipping is pretty much compulsory. If you don't tip, you might get a rude rebuff from the waiter or the waitress. So be careful about that. It's very different. In Australia, for example, if you don't tip, it is not really an issue. If you tip, 10% is fine. But in America, it is heavily regarded as being an important part of the eating process. So when you finish your meal and you pay the bill, that tip has to be there. In some ways, it's the same as getting out of a taxi as well, or a doorman opening the door for you several times a day in the hotel that you're staying at. Tips are quite compulsory in some instances. A tip between 10 or 20% can be left if there has been good service provided. And usually the service is very good in most of the very good eating establishments. America has a very good service culture, so you can be rest assured that most of the tipping is very well validated. So here we see that there are differences when dealing with your counterparts in the United States of America. And as I've discussed with you as we've gone along in this lesson, there are differences between the United States of America and Australia, indeed, in the way both peoples of those countries carry out their business. There are similarities and there are great differences. So when you are doing business in the US, or if your US counterparts come here, do pay attention. Do try to understand them. And as I have said before, try to find common areas where you can meet on common ground. If there are real differences that come about because of the management styles you have or the way that you conduct meetings, for example, then try to discuss them, find solutions as to how you can come together and work together appropriately. It's not good enough to say, well, we're American and we're Vietnamese, and that's how it is. Because if you say that, then you're never going to get anywhere. Your communication ability should be so that you can find a reasonable way of working through things. And no matter how hard it may seem in the beginning, you will find the balance. You will find the solutions to how you're going to work. Sit down and go through these differences together. That is the obvious way of trying to move things along in the international business you're doing together. So I would like to say thank you for the time you've spent with me in this discussion, and I certainly do hope you have received some interesting points in this lesson. And I wish you every success with your United States counterparts when you're doing your business together. Thank you, and bye-bye for now.